The metal gates of Menard Correctional Facility closed behind Pierce Cole with the same dull thud he had heard every day for the past 10 years. Only now he was on the other side. The April morning in southern Illinois greeted him with a cool breeze and an unfamiliar silence, without the constant hum of prison life, without the shouts of the guards, without the clanging of metal. Pierce held a worn duffel bag with a few belongings and a check for $157, all that the state deemed sufficient to start a new life. The 40-year-old man stood on the side of the highway, watching the passing cars. The world had changed over the years. Cars looked different. People walked around staring at small, glowing screens. Even the air seemed different. The bus to Springfield was leaving in 2 hours. Pierce went into a roadside diner and ordered coffee and a sandwich. The waitress, a young girl with tired eyes, glanced at his prison uniform and quickly looked away. He was used to such looks. On the bus, Pierce took a folded piece of paper out of his pocket. The last letter from Priscilla, dated 3 years earlier. "I've filed for divorce, Pierce. I'm sorry, but I can't wait any longer. You need to build your life, and I need to build mine." He had reread those lines hundreds of times, and each time they evoked the same mixture of pain and anger. 150 miles to the north, Priscilla Willis was having breakfast in the kitchen of her home in a quiet neighborhood in Springfield. The 38-year-old woman looked her age, but carried herself with confidence. Her dark hair was neatly styled, and her business suit fit perfectly. Her job as an insurance agent required a presentable appearance and the ability to inspire confidence in her clients. "Are you running late today?" Omar asked as he entered the kitchen in his work clothes. The building contractor was 4 years older than his wife, a broad-shouldered man with calloused hands and a calm disposition. They had married 2 years ago after meeting at a business dinner. Omar needed insurance for his small construction company. The usual time. "Do you have that construction job on MacArthur Street today?" Priscilla finished her coffee and kissed her husband on the cheek. Their relationship was stable, predictable, without the drama and turmoil that had characterized her previous marriage. "Yes, we're pouring the foundation. If the weather holds, we'll be done in a week." Omar picked up his coffee thermos and headed for the door. "By the way, don't forget, we're having dinner with Jake and Linda tomorrow." Priscilla nodded, but her thoughts were far away. She had been dreaming about Pierce for the last few nights. Not nightmares, but strange, vivid dreams, where he stood outside their old house on Walnut Street and looked into the windows. She woke up today with an uneasy feeling she couldn't explain. The bus arrived in Springfield at 2:30 in the afternoon. Pierce got off at the station square and looked around. The city looked both familiar and foreign. The same streets, the same buildings, but lots of new shops, cafes, road signs. Life hadn't stood still in 10 years. The first thing he had to do was find a place to live. The employment center gave him a list of addresses for cheap rooms and motels that would accept people with criminal records. Pierce chose the Sunset Motel on the outskirts of town, $40 a night with a discount for weekly payments. The owner, a heavy-set man in a greasy shirt, glanced indifferently at the documents and handed him the key to room 12. The room was small and gloomy. A single bed, a TV, a small table, and a shower stall in the corner. Pierce threw his bag on the bed and sat down by the window. From here, he could see the part of town where he had spent the first 30 years of his life, where he had met Priscilla, where they had rented their first apartment, where he had made the mistake that had cost him 10 years of his life. Robbing the gas station had been an act of desperation. Pierce had lost his job at the steel mill during the recession. Priscilla was pregnant, and the bills were piling up. He thought he could get the money quickly, and no one would get hurt. But the cash register was almost empty, and the cameras had captured his face. Priscilla lost the baby due to the stress after his arrest. Tom Baker finished his shift at the building materials warehouse at 5 in the evening. The 39-year-old man was one of the few who had kept in touch with Pierce all these years. They had been friends since childhood, growing up in the same neighborhood and attending the same school. Tom had avoided serious trouble with the law, but had come close to it several times. When Tom saw a familiar figure near the warehouse entrance, his heart skipped a beat. Pierce was leaning against the fence, smoking. He looked older than his 40 years. Prison had left its mark. His face was harder, his movements cautious, his gaze constantly scanning his surroundings. "Damn, bro, you're out." Tom walked over and gave his friend a big hug. "Why didn't you tell me? I would have met you. I wanted to do it myself. Get used to it." Pierce's voice sounded hoarse, as if he had forgotten how to talk for long periods of time. "How are you, Tom?" "Same as always. Working here, renting an apartment on the east side. Nothing special." Tom studied his friend's face, trying to figure out what had changed besides his appearance. "Where are you staying?" "A motel on Stevenson Avenue, temporarily." Pierce took a drag on his cigarette. "Tom, I need to know about Priscilla." Tom tensed. He knew this conversation was inevitable, but he had hoped to put it off. "Pierce, bro, maybe we shouldn't? It was a long time ago." "I need to know." Pierce's voice took on a steely tone. "Did she get married?" Tom nodded slowly. 2 years ago, to a guy named Omar Willis. He owns a small construction company. Good guy, as far as I know." Pierce was silent, digesting the information. Tom could see the muscles in his jaw tense. "Where do they live?" "Pierce, listen to me." Tom put his hand on his friend's shoulder. "She's moved on. You should too. You have a chance to start a new life." "Where do they live, Tom?" Tom sighed. He knew Pierce well enough to understand that he wouldn't give up. "On Robert Street, number 847. But Pierce..." "Thanks." Pierce threw his cigarette butt on the ground and crushed it with his foot. "See you." Tom watched his childhood friend walk away toward the bus stop, knowing that nothing good would come of this. That evening, Pierce stood across the street from 847 Robert Street. The 2-story house with blue shutters and a neat lawn looked like the embodiment of the American middle-class dream. Warm light shone from the windows, and a new car, a silver sedan, stood in the driveway. Pierce watched as a familiar figure flashed by in one of the windows. Priscilla. She was preparing dinner, moving around the kitchen with the same grace he remembered. Her hair was shorter, but she had hardly changed. Pierce felt a sharp pain in his chest, a mixture of longing and anger. Half an hour later, a pickup truck pulled up to the house. A man in work clothes got out, tall, broad-shouldered, with confident movements. Omar Willis. Pierce studied him, memorizing every detail. His gait, the way he held his keys, the way he opened the door. Omar kissed Priscilla on the doorstep. They looked happy, content with their lives. Pierce clenched his fists in his jacket pockets. 10 years of his life, 10 years of loneliness, deprivation, humiliation, and she had simply moved on, as if their shared past did not exist. When the lights went out in the house, Pierce slowly walked to the bus stop. A plan was already forming in his head. It wasn't specific or detailed, but the direction was clear. They had to pay for their betrayal, both of them. The next day, Pierce started looking for a job. His criminal record severely limited his options, but his welding skills were in demand. After several rejections, he found work at a small auto repair shop on the outskirts of town. The owner, Carlos Gutierrez, had once had problems with the law himself and treated such people with understanding. "We pay a little, but honestly, come on time, do your job, and there will be no problems," Carlos explained, showing Pierce the welding equipment. The work was simple: repairing exhaust systems, welding cracks in frames, minor bodywork. Pierce was a good welder, and that gave him a sense of stability. But his thoughts kept returning to the house on Robert Street. During breaks, he studied the city newspaper, especially the real estate and local news sections. Sometimes there were mentions of Omar Willis's construction company. Won a tender, completed a project, received an award from the Chamber of Commerce. A successful businessman, a respected member of the community, a loving husband. Pierce cut out these notes and put them in an old notebook. He told himself that he just wanted to know how the people who were once part of his life were doing. But deep down, something dark and cold was growing. Tom visited him several times a week, and sometimes they had a beer at a bar near the motel. Tom tried to involve Pierce in a normal social life, talking about work, girls, plans for the future. But Pierce responded in monosyllables, his thoughts occupied with other things. "You should meet someone," Tom said. "There are good women out there who won't judge you for your past. Linda from accounting asked about you." "I'm not ready," Pierce replied, and Tom saw something in his eyes that made him worry. 3 weeks had passed since Pierce's release, and his life had taken on a strange rhythm. A workday at the auto shop from 8 to 5, dinner at a cheap cafe, then walks around town that invariably ended on Robert Street. He studied several routes to Priscilla and Omar's house and found places where he could watch without attracting attention. His favorite spot was the bus stop across the street. Pierce could sit on the bench with a newspaper in his hands, pretending to wait for the bus, and still see the whole house. He memorized the schedule. Priscilla left for work at 8:15 in her silver sedan, Omar at 7:30 in his pickup truck. They usually returned between 5 and 6 in the evening. On weekends, their routine changed. On Saturday mornings, they would shop at the supermarket on Main Street, then have lunch at Marco's Italian restaurant. They spent Sundays at home or visiting Omar's parents on the other side of town. Pierce followed them at a distance, memorizing the details of their lives. A cardboard shoebox appeared in his motel room. In it, he stored bus tickets, receipts from the cafes where they had lunch, and photographs taken with an old camera he had bought at a pawn shop. The pictures were blurry, but Pierce could make out the faces, the poses, the moments of intimacy between Priscilla and her new husband. It was especially painful to watch them in the evenings. They cooked dinner together, watched TV sitting side by side on the couch, kissed at the door when one of them left to go to the store. Simple, ordinary moments of family life that once belonged to him and Priscilla. Prison had changed Pierce in ways he didn't fully understand. 10 years surrounded by aggression, suspicion, and constant vigilance had taught him to think like a predator. Every person represented a potential threat or opportunity. Every situation required analysis and planning. He now applied these skills to studying the lives of Priscilla and Omar. Pierce knew there was a security system in the house. He had seen the company's stickers on the windows. He knew they didn't have a dog, but they did have a cat, a ginger one that sometimes sat on the windowsill. He knew that Omar kept his tools in the garage and that Priscilla parked her car in the driveway. At the auto repair shop, Carlos noticed a change in Pierce's behavior. He was still working well, but he had become more withdrawn, often distracted, and kept looking at his watch. Several times, Carlos caught him studying a city map during his lunch break. "Everything okay, amigo?" Carlos asked once when Pierce looked at his phone for the 4th time that day to check the time. "Yeah, everything's fine. Just getting used to life on the outside," Pierce replied, but his eyes remained cold and distant. A detailed map of the couple's life was growing in Pierce's mind. He knew that Priscilla bought coffee at a small cafe near her office every morning at 8:45. He knew that Omar picked up materials at the building supply store on Tuesdays and Thursdays. He knew that they ate dinner out on Fridays and went to the gym on Mondays and Wednesdays. This information had no specific purpose, but Pierce collected it with the methodicalness of a scientist. Every detail seemed important. Every fact could be useful. He didn't know what for yet. Priscilla began to notice strange coincidences in mid-May. First, it was a man on the bus who looked familiar. Then she saw a similar figure in the supermarket, staring at her intently from the next aisle. When she turned to get a better look, the man had disappeared. "Maybe it's just me," she said to Omar over dinner, describing her feelings. "But I have a feeling that someone is watching me." Omar put down his fork and looked intently at his wife. "What exactly did you see?" "A man, average height, thin, dark hair. He was on the bus last week, then at Walmart, and yesterday I saw him near the cafe where I buy coffee. Priscilla paused. Maybe it's a coincidence. It's a small town. Or maybe not. Omar took his wife's hand. If you see him again, call me right away, and maybe you should change your route to work for a few days. Priscilla nodded, but didn't tell her husband the most disturbing thing. The man reminded her of Pierce, not in appearance, but in his mannerisms, the way he moved. But that was impossible. Pierce was in prison, with 6 months left to serve, according to the latest information she had received 3 years ago. Nevertheless, Priscilla was on her guard for the next few days. She changed the time she left the house, took different routes to work, and studied the faces in the rearview mirror carefully. The strange feeling of being watched did not go away, but she did not notice anything else specific. Pierce realized that Priscilla had spotted him when he saw how she had changed her behavior. She started looking around, changing routes, and staying in her car longer before getting out. This annoyed him. Had he changed so much that she couldn't recognize him? Or did she just not want to admit the obvious? He became more cautious, increased his distance of observation, and stopped showing up in places where he had seen her before. Instead, Pierce focused on studying Omar. The building contractor seemed like an open, trusting person. He stopped to talk to neighbors, helped an elderly woman carry her groceries to her car, played with children at the playground near his house. That annoyed Pierce the most. Omar seemed like a good man, someone who was hard to hate, but that made the situation even more painful. Priscilla hadn't just left him for someone else. She had chosen someone who was his complete opposite. Successful, stable, law-abiding. One evening, Pierce followed Omar to Tammy's bar on Sherman Avenue. He sat in the far corner, ordered a beer, and watched his target socialize with friends. Omar laughed, told stories, and bought drinks for others. A popular, respected member of the local community. He doesn't even know what kind of life he stole, Pierce thought, slowly sipping his beer. In his imagination, he pictured scenes of confrontation, explanations, demands for justice. But all these fantasies ended the same way. Omar simply didn't understand what Pierce was talking about. To him, Priscilla was a woman he had met and fallen in love with. The story with her first husband was just part of her past. Tom noticed changes in his friend's behavior in the 3rd week of May. Pierce became more secretive, often distracted during conversations, and stopped answering phone calls. When Tom stopped by his motel on Saturday evening, Pierce looked like he hadn't slept in days. "What's going on with you, bro?" Tom asked as he entered the room. He noticed a box on the table full of papers and photos, but Pierce quickly closed the lid. "Nothing special. I'm working, trying to get my life together." "Come on, Pierce. I've known you since we were kids." Tom sat down on the only chair in the room. "You've been driving by her house, haven't you? Watching them?" Pierce froze, then slowly turned to face his friend. "How did you know?" "Because I know you, and because I saw you on Robert Street last week when I was driving home from work." Tom sighed. "Pierce, you're playing with fire. This isn't going to end well." "I just want to understand how they live. With my money, by the way." "What money? You were in prison for 10 years. I put everything into that house on Walnut Street when we were married. My savings, my job, and now they live like kings, and I'm staying in a motel for $40 a night." Pierce's voice grew sharper. "She didn't even come to the trial. She didn't even try to support me." "Pierce, she lost the baby because of your arrest. Do you think it was easy for her? Was it easy for me? 10 years in a cage, thinking every day about her at home, waiting." Pierce stood up and began pacing the room. "And a year later, she hired a divorce lawyer. A year later, Tom." Tom understood that his friend was stuck in the past, unable to accept reality. Prison hadn't just deprived Pierce of his freedom, it had frozen him emotionally at the moment he was arrested. "Listen to me carefully," Tom said, standing up. "You have to leave them alone. Find yourself a woman. build a new life. What you had with Priscilla is over. Understand that. Easy to say. It's not easy, but it's necessary. Tom walked to the door. If you don't stop, it will end badly. For everyone, including you. After Tom left, Pierce sat down on the bed and opened the box. He took out one of the photos, Priscilla and Omar leaving the restaurant, holding hands. She was smiling, looking happy. That was exactly how she used to smile at him, at the very beginning of their relationship. Pierce slowly tore the photo in half, separating the couple. Then he taped the half with Priscilla back together and put it back in the box. He threw the half with Omar in the trash can. The following week, Pierce changed his tactics. Instead of direct observation, he began to study the periphery of their lives. He befriended the waitress at the restaurant where they had lunch on Fridays. He found out the mailman's delivery schedule for their street. He discovered that Priscilla ordered groceries online and they were delivered on Thursdays. Every little detail became part of the big picture. Pierce wasn't planning anything specific, but the information gave him a sense of control. He knew their lives better than they did. He knew they had no idea of the extent of his interest. At the auto repair shop, Carlos reprimanded him several times for his inattention. Pierce burned a hole in the exhaust pipe because he forgot to switch the welding mode. He cut his hand on a sharp edge of metal because he was thinking about something else. If you can't concentrate on your work, take a vacation, Carlos said after another mistake. Sorry, Carlos, my head is full. A woman? Pierce nodded. And it was true, though not in the sense the workshop owner meant. By the end of May, watching had become a habit for Pierce, almost a ritual. He woke up every morning thinking about seeing them today, learning something new about their lives. It filled the void left by prison, giving him purpose and direction. But gradually, simple observation was no longer enough. Pierce wanted more. He wanted them to know he was there, to feel the discomfort he felt every day. He wanted to disrupt their quiet, comfortable life. Pierce made his first anonymous call on a Saturday morning in early June. Priscilla and Omar were having breakfast in the kitchen when the home phone rang. Pierce watched from his car, parked 3 blocks away, holding an old cell phone he had bought with cash. Hello? Priscilla answered. Pierce remained silent, listening to the familiar voice. Even after 10 years, he would recognize it among thousands. A wave of emotions rose in his chest. Pain, anger, longing. Hello? Who is this? Priscilla repeated, then hung up. Pierce closed his eyes, feeling a strange satisfaction. He had disturbed their morning peace, made them think, made them worry. That was only the beginning. The calls became regular. Pierce called at different times, early in the morning, late at night, during dinner. He never spoke, just listened to their voices, sometimes the background sounds of their lives, the TV, conversations, laughter, the life that once belonged to him. That's the 5th call this week, Priscilla said to Omar on Thursday evening. They were sitting in the living room, but the TV was off. The atmosphere in the house had become tense. Maybe we should change our number, Omar suggested. What if it's someone who really wants to get in touch with us? Clients? Relatives? Priscilla nervously fiddled with the edge of the pillow. Omar, I think I know who it is. Her husband looked at her intently. Who? Pierce, my ex-husband. The words came out with difficulty. He was supposed to get out of prison this year. Maybe he's already out. Omar knew about his wife's past, but they rarely talked about it. Priscilla had told him the basic facts early in their relationship. Her first husband had committed armed robbery, got 10 years, and they divorced. She preferred not to discuss the details. Are you sure? No, but there's something else. The man I've been seeing in recent weeks. The one who's been following me. The more I think about it, the more it looks like him. Priscilla got up and went to the window, peeking cautiously through the curtain. He's changed, he's aged, but his gait, his manner of carrying himself. Omar walked over to his wife and put his arms around her shoulders. We're going to the police tomorrow morning. Detective Lisa Thompson had been working in the homicide division for 15 years. A 45-year-old woman with short graying hair and a penetrating gaze, she had seen enough domestic violence and stalking to take the Willis couple's complaint seriously. "When was the last time you had contact with your ex-husband?" she asked Priscilla, making notes in her notebook. 3 years ago. The last letter. I told him about the divorce and asked him not to write anymore." Priscilla sat up straight, her hands folded in her lap. "No contact since then." "And when was he supposed to be released?" "I don't know exactly. Sometime this year." Detective Thompson looked at Omar. "Mr. Willis, have you ever met Pierce Cole?" "No, never. When Priscilla and I met, he was already in prison. She only told me the bare minimum about him." "I see." Thompson continued writing. "Tell me more about what has been happening in recent weeks." Priscilla described the feeling of being watched, the man in different places, the changes in his behavior. Omar added details about the anonymous calls, their frequency and timing. "Do you have reason to believe that Mr. Cole could pose a physical threat?" Priscilla paused. "Pierce never laid a hand on me, but he was armed during the robbery, and prison could have changed him." Detective Thompson closed her notebook. "We'll check if he's been released, and if so, we'll talk to him. For now, I advise you to install security cameras, record all suspicious calls, document any incidents, and call 911 immediately if you see him near the house." Pierce realized they had gone to the police when he saw a patrol car outside their house on Tuesday evening. The police officer was talking to Omar at the front door, writing something down in his notebook. Pierce watched from his car 4 blocks away, feeling a mixture of anger and satisfaction. So they were afraid of him. So his actions were having an effect. The next day, 2 police officers came to the auto repair shop. Carlos pointed them to Pierce, who was working under the hood of an old Chevrolet. Pierce straightened up, wiped his hands with a rag, and looked calmly at the officers. "Pierce Cole?" "Yes. We'd like to talk to you. This is Detective Thompson from the Major Crimes Division." Lisa Thompson studied Pierce intently. The man seemed calm and in control, but she saw something familiar in his eyes, a prison-bred wariness, an ability to instantly assess danger. "What's this about?" "Your ex-wife, Priscilla Willis. She and her husband are complaining about harassment." "I don't know what you're talking about." "Mr. Cole, you were released a month ago after serving a 10-year sentence. That's a big change. It's understandable that you would want to know how the people who were important to you in the past are doing." Thompson's voice was even, professional. But there's a line between interest and stalking. Pierce remained silent, continuing to dry his hands. Carlos watched from a distance, clearly nervous. "Where were you last night between 7 and 9? "At home, at the motel." "Any witnesses?" "No." "And Saturday morning? Around 9? Pierce realized they knew about the calls. "Home again." Detective Thompson took out a business card. "Mr. Cole, I understand that returning to normal life after prison is a difficult process, but if you continue to harass the Willis family, we will be forced to take action. Is that clear?" Pierce took the card and nodded. After the police left, Carlos approached him. "What's the problem, amigo?" "My ex-wife. She thinks I'm following her." "And you?" Pierce looked the workshop owner straight in the eye. "No." But Carlos saw enough in that look to understand that the problems were just beginning. The police visit forced Pierce to temporarily change his tactics. He stopped calling and didn't show up near Priscilla and Omar's house, but he continued his surveillance, only more cautiously. He used binoculars from a distance, following them in shopping malls, where it was easy to blend into the crowd. Pierce began to study Omar's work routes. The construction company was small, Omar himself, plus 3 workers. They had several projects around the city, renovating an office building on Capitol Avenue, a new house in the suburbs, and refurbishing an old warehouse. The construction site on the outskirts of the city proved to be particularly interesting. It was a house for a young family, an isolated location with few witnesses. Omar often worked there alone, especially in the evenings when he needed to finish some details. Pierce came there several times after work and watched Omar lay tiles, paint walls, and install plumbing. Methodical, honest work. The man was building a house for other people, helping them realize their dream of owning their own home. That's what infuriated Pierce the most. Omar was a good man. It would have been easier to hate him if he had been a scumbag, a drunk, or a loser. But Omar Willis was exactly the kind of man any woman would choose over an ex-convict. Problems at work began a week after the police visit. Pierce started making more mistakes, was often late, and several times didn't show up for work at all, making excuses. Carlos was patient for a long time, but his patience ran out when Pierce ruined an expensive part due to carelessness. "I'm sorry, amigo, but this can't go on," Carlos said on Friday evening. "You're a good welder, but your head isn't in it. It's dangerous for you and for others." "Carlos, give me another chance. I've given you 5 chances. Take your pay and sort out your problems. When you're ready to work for real, come back." Pierce took the money and left the workshop in silence. Outside, he stopped and looked at the city at night. Without a job, he couldn't pay for the motel, couldn't buy food or gas for his car. In a week or two, he would have to live on the streets. Priscilla and Omar continued their comfortable life, protected by the police, the law, and society. They had a house, a stable income, plans for the future. He had nothing. Tom found Pierce at Tammy's bar on Saturday night. His friend was sitting in the far corner, already quite drunk, staring gloomily at the wall. There were empty beer bottles on the table. "I heard you got fired," Tom said, sitting down across from him. "News travels fast. Carlos called me. He asked if you were okay in the head." Tom ordered 2 beers. "Pierce, you're going downhill, and you know why. Don't start." "I'm going to start. The police were at your work, because of Priscilla. Are you completely out of your mind?" Pierce raised his head sharply. His eyes burned with anger. "You don't understand. Nobody understands. I lost 10 years of my life. 10 years. And they live like kings. You lost those years because of your own stupidity. You robbed a gas station with a gun, for God's sake." "I did it for her. For us. We had no money. She was pregnant. And what was the result? She lost the baby. You went to prison. Everything fell apart." Tom leaned across the table. "Pierce, it's time to grow up. It's time to let go of the past. Easy for you to say, you didn't lose everything. You didn't lose everything. You have a chance to start over. Find a job, meet a good woman, build a normal life." Tom drank his beer. "But if you keep up this nonsense with the stalking, you'll lose that chance too." Pierce was silent for a long time, twirling the bottle in his hands. "She betrayed me, Tom. She promised to wait. She swore her love. People change. Circumstances change. 10 years is an eternity." "Not for me. For me, it was like yesterday." Tom realized that it was impossible to get through to his friend. Prison had truly frozen Pierce emotionally. He was stuck on the day he was arrested, unable to accept that the world had moved on. "If you don't stop, it'll end badly." Tom repeated the words he had said a month ago. "Maybe that's how it should be," Pierce replied, finishing his beer. On Sunday morning, Pierce woke up with a severe headache and empty pockets. He had spent his last money on booze. His motel payment was due tomorrow, and he didn't have a new job. He lay on the narrow bed, staring at the ceiling, thinking about Priscilla and Omar. Right now, they were probably having breakfast in their cozy kitchen, planning their day, maybe making love in their big, comfortable bedroom, living the life that should have been his. Pierce got up and walked over to the box of photographs and notes. Months of observation, detailed information about their habits, routines, weaknesses. All this time, he didn't know why he was collecting this data. Now, he understood. If he lost the roof over his head, if he had nothing left, at least he could destroy their happiness. He could make them pay for their betrayal. Pierce took a folding knife out of his nightstand drawer, one he had carried with him even before prison. The blade was rusty, but sharp enough. He folded it and put it in his jacket pocket. The time for just watching was over. Tuesday, June 15th, 7:47 p.m. Omar Willis was working alone on the construction of the Andersons' new home on Oak Hill Road. It was an isolated site on the outskirts of Springfield, with the nearest neighbors half a mile away. Omar wanted to finish laying the parquet flooring in the living room by the end of the week. The family planned to move into their new home by the 4th of July. It had been a long day. 2 of his workers had called in sick, and Omar decided to stay late to keep up with the schedule. Turning on portable floodlights, he methodically laid oak planks, checking each joint. The radio played country music softly. At 8:15 p.m., Omar heard the sound of a car on the gravel driveway. He straightened up and rubbed his lower back. Probably someone who had gotten lost and wanted to ask for directions. That happened often in this new neighborhood. Omar walked to the front door, still holding the hammer in his hand. A man of medium height in a dark jacket stood on the doorstep. His face was hidden by the dim light of the porch. "Good evening. Are you Omar Willis?" "Yes. Who are you?" "I need to talk to you. About Priscilla." Omar tensed. Something in the stranger's voice sounded threatening. "I'm listening. She was my wife, 10 years ago." Omar's heart skipped a beat. Pierce Cole. He instinctively gripped the hammer handle. "Mr. Cole, you shouldn't have come here. The police are already..." "The police don't understand anything." The man took a step forward. "You stole my life. I didn't steal anything. When we met Priscilla, you had already been in prison for 3 years. She should have waited. People have a right to happiness. She waited long enough." The conversation continued for several minutes. The voices grew louder, the tension mounted. Then there were sounds of a struggle, a scream, the thud of a heavy object hitting something hard, then silence. Mrs. Eleanor Clark, a 75-year-old retiree, was walking her dog on a country road at 9:20 p.m. when she heard a scream. The sound came from the Andersons' unfinished house. Eleanor knew that a contractor often worked there in the evenings, but the scream sounded strange, frightened. She waited a few minutes, listening, but heard nothing more. When she returned home, Eleanor told her husband about the incident. Henry Clark, a former military man, advised his wife to call the police. "Better safe than sorry," he said. The emergency call was made at 9:43 p.m. A patrol car arrived at Oak Hill Road at 9:58 p.m. Officers Mike Rodriguez and Jennifer Chen saw Omar's pickup truck in the driveway, and the lights were on in the house. Everything looked normal, but the front door was wide open. "Mr. Willis?" Officer Rodriguez called out as he approached the door. "Springfield Police." There was no answer. The officers entered the house, keeping their hands on their holsters. In the living room, amid scattered floorboards and construction tools, lay the body of a man. There was a large amount of blood, a head injury, and an unnatural posture. "We need an ambulance and detectives," Chen said into her radio. "We have a dead body." Detective Lisa Thompson arrived at the scene at 10:35 p.m. with a team of forensic experts. She immediately recognized the victim's name. A month ago, she had interviewed Omar and his wife about a complaint of harassment. The examination showed that Omar Willis had been struck multiple times in the head with a heavy object. The murder weapon was not found. There were no signs of robbery. The wallet was untouched, the tools were in place, and the victim's car was untouched. "It looks like a crime of personal animosity," said forensic scientist David Park as he photographed the scene. "The killer struck with a fury beyond what was necessary to kill." Thompson studied the scene. The parquet floorboards were scattered, some broken. There were signs of a struggle, blood splattered on the walls and ceiling. The victim had tried to fight back. Time of death? Preliminary, between 8:30 and 9 p.m. replied medical examiner Robert Lee. "I'll be more precise after the autopsy." Thompson went out onto the porch, where Officer Rodriguez was questioning the neighbors. Except for the Clark family, no one else had heard or seen anything. "Mrs. Clark says she heard a scream around 9:45, Rodriguez reported. No further details. Cars? Suspicious people? No, but she has poor night vision. At 11:15 p.m., Detective Thompson stood at the door of the house on Robert Street. She had the hardest part of the job ahead of her, telling Priscilla about her husband's death. Priscilla opened the door in her bathrobe, her hair disheveled. When she saw the police officer, she immediately understood that something serious had happened. "Mrs. Willis, may I come in?" "What's wrong? Omar isn't home from work yet." "Priscilla, I'm very sorry. Your husband is dead." The woman staggered and grabbed the doorframe. Thompson caught her and helped her into the living room. "How? What happened?" "He was killed at work. We are investigating the circumstances." Thompson spoke softly but professionally. "Priscilla, I know this is difficult, but I need to ask you a few questions." Priscilla nodded, wiping away her tears. The shock had not yet worn off, and the reality of what had happened had not yet sunk in. "When was the last time you saw Omar?" "This morning. He left for work at 7:30. He said he would be late because he wanted to finish the floor at the Andersons' house." "Did he mention any problems? Conflicts? Threats?" "No, nothing like that." Priscilla paused, then looked at the detective. "What about Pierce, my ex-husband? Have you checked where he was?" "We'll check everyone who could have had a motive." "Priscilla, tell me again about your relationship with Pierce Cole." The interrogation continued until midnight. Priscilla told the whole story of her first marriage, her husband's arrest, their divorce, and the harassment of the last few weeks. Thompson took detailed notes. "Do you think Pierce is capable of murder?" "I don't know. He's changed. Prison makes people tougher." Priscilla wrapped her arms around herself. "But I can't believe he would kill Omar." "Did Omar have any enemies? Dissatisfied customers? Business conflicts?" "No, everyone loved him. He was an honest contractor. He never cheated anyone." Priscilla's voice broke. "Who could have done this?" Thompson closed her notebook. "We'll find out. Right now, you need to rest. Is there anyone who can stay with you?" "My sister. I'll call her." "Good. And Priscilla, don't stay alone until we find the killer." The next morning, Detective Thompson began her methodical work. The first thing she needed to do was find Pierce Cole. At the Sunset Motel, the manager reported that Cole had checked out yesterday morning without paying for the last 2 days. "Where did he go?" "He didn't say. He took his things and left in an old Honda." Thompson got a description of Pierce's car and sent it out to all patrol officers. Then she drove to Tom Baker's warehouse. Tom was nervous as he answered her questions. "Yes, I know about Pierce's problems with his ex-wife. I tried to stop him." "When was the last time you saw him?" "Saturday night, at Tammy's bar. He was drunk, angry, talking about revenge." "What exactly did he say?" Tom paused, struggling with himself. Should he betray his childhood friend or hide the truth from the police? "Tom, we're talking about murder. Helping a murderer escape is a crime. He said they had to pay for their betrayal, both of them, and that if he had nothing, neither would they." Thompson wrote down Tom's words. Where could he be staying? Friends? Relatives? "Pierce has no relatives in town, no friends either, only me." Tom sighed. "Detective, I understand how it looks, but Pierce is not a murderer. Angry, resentful, but not a murderer." "Mr. Baker, anger and resentment are the most common motives for murder." By Wednesday evening, Thompson's team had gathered the initial evidence. The fingerprints at the crime scene belonged to the victim and several workers, which was to be expected. There were no signs of forced entry. Omar had let the killer in voluntarily. A witness saw a dark car leaving the area around 9:30 p.m., but couldn't remember the model or license plate number. The murder weapon was not found, despite a thorough search within a mile of the house. "The killer was well prepared," said Detective Park. "He took the weapon with him and left no obvious clues." "Or just lucky," Thompson replied. "It was an impulsive murder, but the killer didn't lose his cool." The autopsy showed that Omar was struck 7 times in the head with a heavy object, probably a hammer or a crowbar. The first 3 blows were fatal, and the rest were inflicted on the already dead body. "A classic case of a crime of passion," explained the medical examiner. "The killer lost control." On Thursday morning, Thompson received information from the probation service. Pierce Cole had not checked in for 2 days, which was a violation of his release conditions. He was declared wanted. The detective decided to re-examine the motel where Pierce had been staying. They found some interesting items in a dumpster behind the building. Torn photos of Priscilla and Omar, notes with their daily schedule, and a map of the area with marked routes. "Looks like a stalker's dossier," said Officer Rodriguez, examining the findings. Thompson laid the torn photos on the table. The pictures were taken from a distance and showed the couple's daily life. Some of Omar's photos were scratched or pierced with something sharp. "There's a motive. There's a means. There was opportunity," Thompson mused aloud. "All that's left is to find Pierce Cole himself." But by the end of the week, he was still missing. The man had seemingly vanished into thin air. Pierce Cole spent 4 days in an abandoned house on the outskirts of Springfield's industrial zone. The old building had once belonged to a family of migrants, but had been abandoned after the local factory closed. The windows were broken, the roof was leaking, but it provided shelter from the rain and prying eyes. He ate almost nothing, drinking water from a leaky tap in the basement. He hid his car in the overgrown garage behind the house. Most of the time, Pierce lay on an old mattress, remembering the events of Tuesday evening. Every detail was etched in his memory with photographic precision. The conversation with Omar, the builder's calm voice, the attempt to find a compromise. "People have a right to happiness," he said. Those words exploded in Pierce's head. The right to happiness? Where was his right to happiness all these 10 years? He hadn't planned to kill. He just wanted to talk, to explain, to make him understand the scale of the betrayal. But Omar was too calm, too reasonable. He talked about Priscilla as if she were his property, as if 10 years of marriage to Pierce meant nothing. The blow with the hammer was instinctive. Omar fell, blood spilling onto the floor, and Pierce kept hitting him, again and again, pouring out years of pent-up pain and rage. On Saturday morning, Detective Thompson received a call from Officer Daniels, who was patrolling the industrial area. "Detective, I found Cole's car. It's a 2006 Honda Civic, and the license plate numbers match. It's hidden in the garage of an abandoned house on Industrial Road." Thompson assembled a SWAT team. 6 officers in body armor, a sniper on a neighboring building, a negotiator in case Pierce tried to take hostages or kill himself. The house was surrounded by noon. Thompson took a megaphone. "Pierce Cole, this is Detective Thompson from the Springfield Police Department. The house is surrounded. Come out with your hands up." A long silence. Then the creak of a door. Pierce came out onto the porch slowly, his hands raised. He looked exhausted, thin, his beard grown out. His clothes were dirty, his eyes red from lack of sleep. "On your knees, hands behind your head." Pierce dropped to his knees. The officers ran up, handcuffed him, and searched him. They found a folding knife and a wallet with documents on him. He offered no resistance. "Pierce Cole, you are under arrest on suspicion of the murder of Omar Willis. You have the right to remain silent." At the police station, Pierce sat in the interrogation room, staring at the table. Thompson studied him through the one-way glass. The suspect looked broken, but not aggressive, more relieved that it was over. "Ready to talk?" Thompson asked as she entered the room. Pierce nodded. "I killed him." "Mr. Cole, your lawyer isn't here yet." I don't need a lawyer. I killed Omar Willis on Tuesday night. With a hammer. 7 blows. Pierce's voice was quiet but clear. Do you want details? Thompson turned on the tape recorder. Tell us what happened. Pierce told the whole story. Months of watching, losing his job, deciding to talk to Omar. How the conversation turned into an argument. How he lost control. I took the hammer from his toolbox. He tried to stop me, but it was too late. Pierce paused. After the first blow, I couldn't stop. Too much anger had built up. Where's the murder weapon? I threw it into the river at MacArthur Bridge. It's deep. You won't find it. Why did you do it, Pierce? Because they stole my life. Priscilla promised to wait. She swore her love. And he. Pierce looked up at the detective. He didn't even understand what he had taken from me. To him, she was just a woman he met. But to me, she was everything. Tom Baker came to the department the next day to give his official statement. Sitting across from Detective Thompson, he looked tormented by guilt. I should have done more, he said. Stopped him somehow. You tried. You told him the truth, warned him of the danger. It wasn't enough. Tom rubbed his face with his hands. Pierce was my best friend since childhood, but prison changed him. He was stuck in the past, couldn't let go. Thompson recorded his statement. Did he ever talk about plans to harm Omar Willis? Not specifically, but he talked about revenge, about them having to pay. The last time we saw each other, he was very drunk and angry. He said that if he didn't have anything, then neither would they. Did you think he was capable of murder? Tom was silent for a long time. Honestly, no. I thought he would just keep watching them, maybe scare them. But murder? He shook his head. Pierce was never violent. Even the robbery was out of desperation, not anger. What changed? 10 years in a cage. 10 years of thinking about the same thing, replaying the hurt. It drives you crazy. The trial lasted 2 weeks in October. The prosecutor sought a life sentence, citing the brutality of the murder and the prolonged persecution of the victims. Pierce's court-appointed lawyer sought a lighter sentence, citing his client's psychological problems and his sincere confession. Priscilla testified as a witness for the prosecution. She spoke about her marriage to Pierce, his arrest, and the persecution after his release. She spoke quietly, restrainedly, without looking at her ex-husband. I don't want revenge, she said in her closing statement. I just want justice. Omar was a good man. He didn't deserve to die. Pierce did not deliver a final statement. He sat silently with his head bowed while Judge Margaret Davis read the sentence. Pierce Cole, the court finds you guilty of the first-degree murder of Omar Willis. You are sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. The sound of the judge's gavel sounded like the final period in a story that began 10 years ago with a gas station robbery. Pierce Cole was transferred to the Tams Maximum Security Prison in southern Illinois. He spent the first 2 years in solitary confinement, then was transferred to the general population. He participates in prison rehabilitation programs and works in the library. In 2027, he wrote a letter of apology to Priscilla, but she did not receive it because her address had changed. Priscilla Willis sold her house on Robert Street and moved to Des Moines, Iowa, to live with her sister. She changed her last name back to her maiden name, Harris. She works for an insurance company and lives alone in a small apartment. She is not remarried. She sees a psychotherapist and is slowly coping with her trauma. Every year on the anniversary of Omar's death, she visits his grave in Springfield. Tom Baker quit his job at the warehouse a month after the trial. His guilt over not being able to stop his friend led to depression and alcohol problems. He underwent treatment and moved to Chicago. He works as a mechanic for a large company and got married in 2026. He has no children. He never communicated with prisoners again. Carlos Gutierrez, the owner of an auto repair shop, no longer hires ex-convicts. The Pierce case scared him and changed his attitude toward reintegration programs. Too much risk, he tells his colleagues. The revenge that Pierce had planned for so long destroyed the lives of everyone involved in the story. His own life ended behind prison walls, Omar's life was cut short at 42, and Priscilla was left with trauma that will stay with her for the rest of her days. 10 years of waiting ended in one evening, and 7 blows with a hammer. The price of revenge proved too high for everyone.